So now we're going to talk about how to make sure that our earthworms are fed. There are over 3,000 species of earthworms on the planet, and they all have different preferences of food and different preferences for habitat. We were just talking about different profile habitats. Some earthworms are going to be surface dwellers who want to eat fresh plant material. Some earthworms are going to be surface dwellers who want to eat mammal manures, animal manures, and detritus, so more carbonaceous plant material, dead plant material. Some earthworms live all the way down, could be meters down into the soil. Some earthworms are really tiny, some earthworms are really large. Some earthworms are indigenous or adapted. Some earthworms are invasive and also adapted. We want to be really careful not to bring in earthworms to a habitat that has not had earthworms, number one. This is happening in some of our forests in North America and across the planet, where we have all of this detritus on the forest floor that is being consumed too rapidly by invasive earthworms that are brought in by, in many cases, fishermen. So we have to be super careful. They can be imported in soil. They can be imported in mulches and composts. It's not easy to know whether or not you're importing your earthworms. It's just something to be conscious about. But today, we're going to talk about how to feed the earthworms right in our soils under our feet. How do we make sure that they feel welcome in our garden? So, I'm going to do a little mowing here. This is going to be a part of our continued module here. We're going to do a sheet mulch garden. But in order to start that, I need to get this living plant material, which is so gorgeous. The red clover, the grasses, the dandelion, the chicory, the alfalfa, a nice mix. But what we're going to do is mow this really low to the ground, and that's going to drop all that plant material, green, luscious, nitrogen-rich plant material, on the soil surface. So that's going to feed 1 or 2 sets of earthworms, but we're going to add a little bit more to this to make sure that we're feeding a diversity of earthworms before we start laying our barrier, our weed barrier material down. So pardon me for just a minute. I'm going to get the mower going and I'll show you how low to mow this just for this sheet mulch garden, but just keeping in mind that we're doing this to make sure that there's plenty of organic matter under our weed barrier. Having a bagged mower is pretty awesome. I have one for, a riding mower and for the push mower, because if you are growing lots of biomass, you can collect that and use it for a lot of different purposes. You could put some of this in your worm bin. If you have a red wiggler worm bin that you're keeping indoors, you can take some of your fresh mowed plant material in. That would be a high nitrogen food source. And then also, it's nice to utilize in your compost and as mulch. But it's also really important to make sure that you're not taking it all. All of that biomass being removed from the soil is extractive. And so you want to make sure that you're giving back. And one major reason why you want to give back is to feed the earthworms. Now we could mow this even lower because we are going to be placing some cardboard over this mowed area for the sheep mulching. And one of the primary things to think about when you're doing a sheep mulching bed is when you're going to plant it. If you're going to plant it in short order after creating it, you want to make sure that you don't have anything that is pushing the cardboard up and creating an air gap. We are going to be planting this right away, but my cardboard has been outside for a while, and so it's nice and soft. So I'm not too worried about having an inch or two of extra organic matter pushing on the cardboard. I think it's going to be just fine. So we've got fresh, lush, green plant material down. Right now, the earthworms are going to love that. If you were able to see the ground here, you'd see that there's some residual carbon-rich mulchy material from when I was planting this garden bed 2 years ago. There are some residual wood chips from pathways that are really nice and broken down. This is spongy. That's wonderful carbon-rich material for the worms. I also, as part of my gardening, farming methodology, like to make sure that my soil is remineralized. And so I've got here a combination of a couple different, well, four different rock dust materials. It's a little gypsum. It's a little bit of Tennessee brown rock phosphate. It's a little basalt, an igneous rock. It's a very nice broad spectrum rock material. And then also a carbonatite, which is also an igneous rock. Igneous rocks are, cooled magma. And so they are very diverse. Both of those tend to be less, they don't have a lot of any one particular element. Carbonatite does have a fair amount of calcium and phosphorus in them, but not too much of any of the trace elements or other elements. So I'm just spreading this out. Earthworms love rock dust. They also, basalt they really love. I've noticed that. If you're going to feed your worm bin and you're trying to extract some of your worm castings or your vermicompost, using a little bit of basalt rock dust is a great way to encourage them to one side or the other of your bin. So we're just adding a little bit there. We're not really looking to tilt the nutrient content of the soil so much. The soil here naturally tends to be pretty high in calcium, pretty high in phosphorus, a decent amount of potassium, pretty good on a lot of the trace elements. We do need a little extra sulfur. Most soils need sulfur. We need extra boron. Most soils need boron. Both of that's in there. Now we're going to add a little compost. And so this is for the earthworms, but honestly it's for the plants as well. This is a high quality, biologically diverse compost, well matured. We want to make sure that our compost, if we're applying it for quick planting, we want to make sure that our compost is well broken down, matured, looks like soil. That way, we're not tying up any nitrogen in the process of breaking down that extra plant material. So we've got a high nitrogen material with the fresh plant material that we just mowed. Any green plant material is going to have a decent amount of nitrogen in it because every chlorophyll molecule has 4 atoms of nitrogen in it and 1 atom of magnesium. That's what the chlorophyll molecule is made up of. Some plants have more of that. It's more concentrated. Those chlorophyll molecules are more concentrated, but in general, decent amount in the green plant material. there's going to be a decent amount of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Also, you know, some of the trace elements as well. I've done the analysis on this compost. It's got a decent amount of boron, a decent amount of other trace elements in it, but not excessive. That's one thing we have to watch out with composts, especially manure-based composts, is that they can be too high in the NPK, the nitrogen, the potassium, the phosphorus. Sometimes too high in sodium, sometimes too high in chloride and zinc. So I don't recommend using compost excessively. As you see, I'm just really doing a dusting. If you could actually see what's being applied here, you would see that I'm not really even covering the soil surface, it's a dusting. This is about 30 pounds of compost that I'm applying over a 6 by 15, I'm guessing here, 6 by 15 foot space. Earthworms will love it. So will the chickens if they can get over here. All right. My next addition, I can find it. This is just a little bit of kefir, a dairy kefir, mixed with molasses. This is just experimental. Don't feel like you need to try this at home, but if you want to, experiment. So I'm just using a little bit of rainwater mixed with just a little bit of molasses, a little kefir. There's also a consortium of microorganisms in this blend called Effective Microorganisms. It's a trademarked product. Happy to share information about that. But what I'm doing is I'm just adding a little bit of active biology right to the surface of the soil along with that compost. There's plenty of biology there. There's actually plenty of biology also on the surface of that mowed plant material as well. Really just trying to get the biology really activated here. Everybody's going to be well fed before we start laying down the weed barrier material. Because what we're doing is we're going to block the sunlight from the soil. And that means that the only plant material that's going to be, photosynthesizing in this space are plants that I put here. And it's obviously not going to be as dense as this. It's not going to be as dense as it was. There's a lot of photosynthate being pumped into the soil by this suite of plants that we've just now knocked down. And so I'm trying to give a little bit of a supplementation, something to keep the soil here from going through a recessive period. I want it to stay active. So the cardboard itself is actually going to be good worm food as well. But I think I'll do one more little addition. Again, trying to be mindful not to have the cardboard be pushed up too much. But this is a little bit of freshly mowed green material with some oak leaves. I'm just going to do a light dusting of that. Earthworms, they burrow. They come up out of their burrow. And in order to maintain a level of, security and safety, food needs to be in close proximity to the entrance to that burrow. So they're going to come up, they're going to grab a leaf or whatever plant material, and they're going to take that down into their burrow and consume it there. You don't see earthworms really dining on top of the soil. The only time you really see earthworms on top of the soil is if they're traveling. And in many cases, it's when they are flooded out of the soil. They're looking, they're either, resigning to die, or they are looking to move out of a very saturated space because it's not hospitable. They breathe through their skin, And so if the soil is oversaturated, like we were talking about, it's very low oxygen. And, water just doesn't, or excuse me, oxygen doesn't diffuse through water very easily. And so they're suffocating. So in many cases, when we're seeing earthworms on the surface, they're not looking for food, they're looking to survive. Earthworms tend to be rather secluded. They don't like to be out in the sun. They don't want to be seen by the sun. They just want to grab their food and go back down into the burrow. So this is a nice little treat for them. It's going to be under the cardboard. It's a mix again of that fresh plant material and carbon-rich material. Kind of keeping it in that, I don't know, maybe 30-to-1, 25-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. I think it's a good mix. So that's how we're going to keep our earthworms fed. And next, we're going to talk about the sheet mulching process.